After reading chapter 3 and 4 of Under the Gun, I am going to say that this book is actually super interesting to me. It's probably one of the most interesting books I've read in a while, besides Endemic. I mean, that was a pretty interesting book. Anyway, the third chapter was kind of just talking about Marvin Gaye and how it was how he was shot. So, by his father, right here. So, Alberta peered out of the room watching as Marvin brutally kicked his father. She had to stop him, or he might kill him. After all, he was still her husband, despite the abuse and the incessant arguments over those misplaced papers. Stop, Alberta shouted to her son. It was no use. Marvin was beyond reason as he fought back against his father. Alberta ran down the stairs, pulled Marvin away, and ushered him back up to his bedroom. Sweating, panting to catch his breath, he stood there silent. Then footfalls. Marvin's father was returning up the stairs. He burst into the room, displaying a .38 caliber pistol, and quietly pulled the trigger. Marvin screamed when the first shot struck him. Alberta wanted to run but couldn't. Her attention was transfixed on her son, who slid down to the floor. Marvin's father walked closer and pulled the trigger again. With the entrance to the room now vacated and Marvin Sr. standing over his son, Alberta ran out of the house, fearful for her own life. Her other son, Frankie, and his wife, Irene, caught her outside. He shot Marvin, she said. He killed my boy. Frankie ventured inside, went upstairs, and found Marvin laying in a pool of blood. Looking up was an unexpectedly sallow face. Marvin whispered to his brother, I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I had him do it. Marvin had been struggling again with drugs and with depression. It's good. I ran my race, he told his brother. There's no more left in me. Marvin Gaye died the day before his 45th birthday by the gun he had given to his father just a few months before at Christmas. So that's just I remember my parents telling me this story of how Marvin Gaye was killed, and reading it kind of it doesn't illuminate the issue, but it brings out the issue of why gun violence is so heavily not talked about as much. There's another quote in chapter 3. It says, it's talking about President Obama's healthcare law. So it would take the average emergency physician over 8 years to save as many lives as Barack Obama did when he signed the Affordable Care Act into law. So that was a good thing. And then it says right here, I present this argument to young physicians and medical students when explaining to them why I believe that it is critical that they learn to advocate on behalf of their patients, both individually at the bedside and collectively in the political arena, so that we can save as many lives as possible. Some will be those on whom we lay hands. Others we will never personally know. And then in chapter 4, it's the revolt against science. And this one talks about the NRA. And this chapter kind of was really interesting to me. There's a quote. It says, I once cared for a teenager who was feeling withdrawn and suicidal. He believed that if he was quote-unquote stronger, his depression would abide. As I walked out of the examination room, I explained to my resident trainee what care the patient needed, including psychotherapy and medications. But I also mentioned the need to talk about guns. As physicians, we must talk with our patients and our politicians about keeping firearms in the home and how this can impact the lives of the most vulnerable. And then it goes down to talk down here because it talks about Kellerman's research, like it did in chapter 3. If the firearm was a handgun, the risk of suicide increased more than 9 times. For teens without pre-existing mental health disorders, a loaded weapon in the home increases the risk of suicide more than 32 times. This data moved Brent and his colleagues to say that prevention of suicide in teens without pre-existing mental health disorders is probably best achieved by restriction of the availability of firearms, particularly loaded ones. And that specific quote, like, stuck out to me so much because with today's society and how easy it's been for people to get weapons, it's good to know that, like, I grew up in a household where we had guns in the house because my dad was a hunter. Not only that, he was in the military. So I grew up with guns in the house, but at the same time, they were always locked up. I had no access to it. So I think that having that information out there is very important.